Chapter 3. It's a bad 'un, young Will, and no mistake. Old Bob straightened from where he was crouched beside Tug, studying the deep wound in his shoulder. It had taken a day and a half for Will to fetch the old horse breeder. It had nearly broken his heart when he rode off on a borrowed horse, leaving Tug in the care of the farmer. Relief had flowed through him when they returned, and he'd opened the barn door to see Tug standing in a stall, ears pricked and nickering a greeting to him. Maybe it was going to be all right, he thought. After all, old Bob was reckoned to be a near wizard when it came to horses. Now, however, old Bob was shaking his head doubtfully. Will's heart sank. He felt an enormous lump forming in his throat. He's not going to... He couldn't bring himself to finish the question. Bob looked at him, shaking his head as he realized what Will was trying to ask. To die? No. The salve has done a good job keeping infection out of the wound. You did well there. The question is, will he ever recover completely? That shoulder muscle is badly damaged, and he's not a young horse anymore. But what will I do if he doesn't? Again, it was a thought that Will couldn't finish. Old Bob patted his arm gently. He knew only too well of the bond that formed between a ranger and his horse. He remembered the first day Will and Tug had met each other, and the almost instant rapport they had developed. Let's not worry about that before we have to, he said. I can't really tell here. We need to get him back to my stables where I can work on him. Help me get him into the cart. Bob had a specifically designed cart for transporting injured horses. It had high sides and a ramp at the back. Will led Tug up the ramp, going slowly as the little horse hopped on his single working front foot up the sloped timber. When Tug was in the cart itself, they passed a canvas sling under his belly. The sling was then attached to the high sides of the cart, and they took up tension on it so that it was supporting most of Tug's weight, taking the strain off his uninjured legs. As he took his place beside Bob on the driver's seat of the cart, Will felt a familiar nudge against the back of his shoulder as Tug butted him affectionately. He reached back and fondled the horse's muzzle as Bob clicked his tongue to the burly cart horse, and the cart lurched forward. How long have you and Tug been together now? Bob asked. Will thought for a moment. Must be over 10 years, Will said, smiling to himself as he cast his mind back over the period they had spent together. They had seen so much together, he thought, from the mountains of Picta to the burning waste of the Aridi Desert. Bob said thoughtfully, and Will looked at him, concerned by the old horse breeder's tone. What? He said. What is it? But Bob shook his head, unwilling for the moment to say any more on the subject. Nothing, he said. Just wondering is all. But Will sensed there was something behind the question, and he wasn't sure he was going to like it. Back at Bob's farm, they carefully helped Tug down from the cart and led him, limping on 3 legs, into a warm, dry stall in the barn. There, Bob gently removed the bandage, crooning apologetically as he did so, and taking care not to cause the little horse any undue pain. Will watched in an agony of uncertainty. There was nothing he could do to assist Bob, nothing he could do to lessen Tug's pain. He forced himself to stay silent, although the temptation was to question the wizened old horse handler at every shift of expression or muttered comment. Now that the heavy bleeding had stopped, he could see how deeply the wolf's fangs had savaged Tug's flesh. There was a large torn flap hanging loose. Bob screwed up his mouth as he examined it. Have to stitch that, he said. But we need to clean the wound completely first. Don't want any infection getting in there. He set about applying salves and ointments to the raw flesh, dabbing gently, speaking to the horse as he did so. From time to time, Tug would flinch, and instantly the gentle hands would stop what they were doing and instead soothe the little horse, stroking his nose and neck. Old Bob glanced round and saw the drawn expression on Will's face. "Nothing you can do here for the moment, young Will," he said. "Why don't you go into my cabin and get us some supper? I'll be through here in 15 minutes, and you can come and see Tug then." "I'd prefer to stay," Will said awkwardly, and Bob nodded, smiling at him. "I know you would, but with all respect, you're distracting me. Every time I make a sound or Tug flinches, you start forward, and then you stop. Just let me do my job and make yourself useful getting supper ready, all right?" Will hesitated. He was loath to leave Tug, but the thought that he was distracting Bob, that he might cause him to make a mistake while he was tending to the horse, settled the matter. He nodded and turned away, then turned back and patted Tug's muzzle. "I won't be far," he said. Tug snorted. His normal reaction would have been to shake his head and mane violently, but such a movement would have caused pain to his injured leg. "I know. Now let Bob get on with his job, worrywart." It was the expression Will often used to Tug. The young ranger smiled now that it was being applied to himself. "I'll be back," he said, and left the barn. As he reached the big double doors, he heard Bob say softly, "I thought he'd never go." Tug responded with another snort.